They told me I should be grateful. A cot in the basement, a flickering bulb, a plate of leftovers left by the door. That was their idea of love. My children smiled as if they were saints, keeping the old man comfortable. But I was still breathing, still watching. And every word they whispered, every dollar they stole, every lie they spoke, I remembered. They thought I was finished. They forgot who built the ground they're standing on. I was born in Brookfield, a town so small everyone knows when you sneeze. I grew up poor, the son of a mechanic who never owned a car that ran longer than a season. I learned early that work was the only prayer anyone answered. So I worked, picked up lumber in my pickup, sold nails door to door, scraped and clawed until one day Collins Supply wasn't just a truck. It was the backbone of this town. My wife, Mary, used to joke that the company was our third child. We poured everything into it. She kept the books while I drove the deliveries. I still see her handwriting on the old ledgers. Neat, steady, proud. When she died, I thought the business would be what kept the family tied together. A legacy, something worth remembering us by. But grief twists people. At least, that's what I told myself when my son, David, and my daughter, Claire, started circling like hawks. They called it modernizing, said I should hand over the reins. I wanted to believe them. I signed papers, passed the title, stepped aside. I thought I was giving them freedom. What I gave them was permission. At first, they visited me in the evenings. "We'll take care of you, Dad. Don't worry about the bills." Sweet words, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Then came the little humiliations. My pension checks went into the company account. My phone vanished because you get confused with technology. The grandchildren stopped coming to my room. "They don't need to see you tired, Dad." What they meant was, they didn't want to see me at all. I'll never forget the night I stood halfway up the stairs and heard them talking in the kitchen. My son's voice, steady, cold. "Why don't we just sell the place already? He doesn't need it. He can barely climb the stairs." Claire laughed. "Put him in a home. We could use the money for something better." My hand gripped the railing so hard the wood creaked. I thought of Mary, of the roses she planted by the porch, of the nights we counted coins at that same table while the kids slept. Now those kids were deciding how fast they could erase me. I told myself I'd confront them. But when I walked into the kitchen, they just smiled that rehearsed smile, poured me a glass of water, and changed the subject. Cowards. The days after that blurred together. I was told to rest more, to let them handle things. Soon my world was one room with a cot and the smell of damp concrete. A basement, not a home. My chair at the dining table vanished. My name disappeared from the company letterhead. But I wasn't gone. Behind the old furnace, in a steel box they never knew existed, was the truth. I never gave them everything. I held on to 51% of the business, tucked behind clauses they never cared to read. And with it, a collection of records I'd kept for years, contracts, loan papers, checks that didn't match the books. They thought I was blind. I saw more than they ever guessed. The final blow came in December. Snow had just started dusting the streets when David knocked on the basement door. His tone was clipped, rehearsed. "Dad, it's time. We found you a place. You'll be more comfortable there." No mention of home, just a place. By sundown, I was standing on the curb with my suitcase, breath fogging in the cold, watching them hammer a for sale sign into the frozen earth. My wife's roses, dead and brittle, crumbled under their boots. They thought they had erased me, that I was just another old fool tossed aside. But I walked away with more than a suitcase. I walked away with the storm. I learned something in the basement. When they strip you of space, of dignity, of voice, you start listening. And I had listened well. Every phone call they took upstairs, every careless word about deals, every laugh about how nobody would ever find out. I wasn't just their father anymore. I was their shadow, and shadows see everything. The first night on the street, I checked into a rundown motel by the county line. A sagging mattress, a heater that coughed instead of warming, and the smell of cigarettes baked into the curtains. It wasn't home, but it was freedom. For the first time in months, I could close a door that belonged to me. I sat on the bed, opened my suitcase, and pulled out what they didn't know I had. Keys to a lockbox in the First Brookfield Bank. Inside, documents I'd been tucking away for years. Forged invoices, contracts signed under the table, proof of every scheme they thought would disappear in paper shredders. The next morning, I walked down Main Street with my collar up against the cold. Brookfield hadn't changed much. The bakery still smelled of cinnamon rolls, the sheriff's office still leaned on the same peeling paint, and people still nodded when they recognized you. Only this time, their nods carried pity. "Poor old Collins," I heard one woman murmur. "Kids pushed him out. Shame." I didn't correct her. Let them think I was weak. A man without teeth doesn't show his bite until it counts. I made my first call from the payphone outside Murphy's Diner. The line crackled, then a familiar voice answered. "You finally ready?" My lawyer, Paul Sloan, asked. He'd been with me through expansions, lawsuits, every storm the company weathered. He also knew what my kids never cared to check, that my 51% never left my hands. "I'm ready," I said. "Get the papers in order." His tone sharpened. "How far do you want to go?" "All the way." By noon, I had another meeting. Not in an office, not in a polished conference room, but at the back of the garage where old Roy still fixed engines. Roy had worked for me 20 years. My kids fired him when he asked for fair pay. His hands shook when he saw me, not from age, but from anger that never cooled. "They ruined me, Mr. Collins," he said. "Told folks I stole, when it was them stealing all along." I placed a file folder on his workbench. "I know, and I can prove it. Question is, will you stand with me when the time comes?" His eyes narrowed. Then he nodded once. "Count me in." One by one, I gathered them. The contractor they cheated on a school project. The clerk they blamed for misplaced funds. Even a supplier from 2 towns over who never got his payment. Each one carried a story. Each one carried anger. And now, each one carried my plan. I kept my movements quiet. Checked into different motels. Never stayed long enough to draw questions. My children thought I was invisible, fading, maybe even dead. But invisibility can be an advantage. You learn to move where no one expects, to speak only when the silence has sharpened enough to cut. Still, there were nights doubt crept in. I'd sit in a dark room with the folder open, staring at Mary's handwriting on the old ledgers. "You sure this is the way?" Her neat script seemed to ask. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure. A father isn't built to destroy his own blood. But then I remembered their laughter, their voices plotting to throw me out like garbage. And the doubt hardened into steel. Christmas drew closer. Brookfield strung lights across Main Street. Children practiced carols in the school gym, and every shop window carried a wreath. My children's house, my house, glowed the brightest of them all. They were planning their grand party, an open show of wealth and power. The mayor was invited. Bankers, investors, even the local news. They wanted the whole town to see them shine. Perfect. Because the brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. 1 week before Christmas, I walked into Paul Sloan's office. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the filings. Ownership confirmation, injunction requests, evidence packets stamped and ready. All that remained was the reveal. "You sure you want it public?" Paul asked. "Yes." My voice didn't waver. Private justice won't be enough. They humiliated me in front of everyone. Now everyone will see the truth. Paul studied me for a moment, then gave a thin smile. "Then Christmas it is." I left his office and stepped into the icy air, the sound of bells ringing faintly from the church across the square. My breath came out white and steady. For the first time since Mary's funeral, I felt alive. Not just surviving, but standing, planning, striking. They thought they'd locked me in the basement. They didn't see I'd been building a staircase out of every insult, every theft, every betrayal. Step by step, I climbed. And on Christmas Eve, I wouldn't knock. I'd walk right through the front door. The first strike was small, almost invisible. That's the best way. Make them feel a chill without knowing where the wind comes from. 3 days before Christmas, the town paper printed an article on page 2. Nothing flashy, just a neat column titled, "Discrepancies in Collins' supply bids raise questions." It quoted an anonymous source, me, through Paul, about contracts awarded for the new courthouse roof. Numbers didn't add up. Subcontractors never paid. The article didn't accuse, it suggested. But suggestion is poison. Once it's in the water, people drink it without realizing. By noon, I heard from Roy. They're panicking, he said, grease still on his hands from the garage. Your son stormed into City Hall demanding names. Nobody gave him any. He looked like a fool. Roy laughed, a sound rough and righteous. That night, I stood across the street from the house. My house. Windows glowed warm. Music carried into the frost. Through the glass I saw them. My son David at the head of the dining table. My daughter Claire pouring wine. Their children running wild across polished floors. They were dressed like royalty, while I stood in the shadows, collar up, unremarkable. One of the boys held up a glass and said, "To Dad, who saved this town." My chest tightened. Saved? They were leeches. The only thing they'd saved was their own greed. I left before the toast ended. Anger burns fast. Patience burns slow. I needed the slow kind. The next morning, Paul filed papers with the county clerk. Ownership confirmation, 51% still mine. David had signed contracts as if he were majority owner, but his signature was smoke without fire. By law, every deal was invalid. Every loan they secured in the company's name rested on sand. Banks don't like sand. By afternoon, my daughter called those banks. I know because I was sitting in Murphy's diner when a teller I once coached in Little League walked by my booth. She leaned down, whispering. Claire sounded desperate. Begged for extensions. We said no. Then she smiled. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Collins." The second strike landed that night. Local Channel 7 ran a teaser. Holiday party at the Collins estate. What secrets lie beneath the tinsel? A reporter I'd spoken to off-record had pieced together enough hints to smell blood. Cameras were already circling. My children thought they'd be interviewed about charity donations and business growth. Instead, the questions would cut deeper. Still, I hadn't shown my face. Not yet. Roy and the others met me in the back room of the VFW hall. A dozen chairs, a pot of weak coffee, walls lined with faded flags. One by one, they told their stories. Lost wages, stolen hours, broken promises. Every word landed like a nail in a coffin. I recorded it all, stacking their testimonies beside the documents. A mountain of truth waiting to avalanche. That night, doubt crept in again. Alone in my motel room, I stared at Mary's photograph. Am I doing this for me, or for revenge? The silence didn't answer. My hands shook as I poured cheap whiskey into a paper cup. Then I remembered the laughter on the stairs, the way my own children spoke of me as dead weight, a liability. My jaw clenched. No, this wasn't revenge. This was correction. 2 nights before Christmas, snow blanketed Brookfield in a silence that swallowed sound. I walked Main Street alone, boot prints the only marks behind me. At the corner, I stopped. Across from me, my house shimmered with lights. Icicles hanging from the eaves, wreaths glowing red and gold. Music spilled out, Bing Crosby singing of White Christmases. And in that glow, in that chorus of false cheer, I made a promise. I would walk through those doors not as their burden, not as their ghost, but as the storm they tried to bury. And when the clock struck midnight on Christmas Eve, Brookfield would know the truth. The closer you get to the finish line, the more snakes crawl out of the grass. I should have known. 2 days before Christmas Eve, Paul called me into his office. His face was pale, his hands clasped tight on the desk. "There's a problem," he said. I didn't like the sound of that. Problems in my world usually wore the faces of my own children. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of a motion filed that very morning. My daughter's signature at the bottom. Claire. She had petitioned the court to freeze company assets, citing my mental instability as a reason to challenge my ownership. In plain English, they wanted me declared incompetent. A legal ghost. "She claims you've been confused, forgetful," Paul said carefully. "If this sticks, they could argue you don't understand what you're signing. They'll stall the filings until after the holidays." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That's how far they were willing to go. Not just lies behind doors. Not just stealing paychecks and rooms. No, they wanted to erase me on paper. A man with no name, no rights, no voice. I stood up so fast the chair skidded back. My fists clenched. "She'll regret it," I muttered. Paul didn't argue. He just pushed another folder toward me. "That's why we prepared. These affidavits, testimonies from the men you helped, from Roy, from the suppliers. They speak to your clarity. And the documents you saved, well, they speak louder than she ever could. I left his office with the weight of betrayal pressing hard on my shoulders. My daughter, the little girl who once held my hand on her first day of school, who cried when she couldn't find her teddy bear, I carried her on my shoulders. And now she wanted me labeled senile so she could cash out. That night, I walked into Murphy's diner. The bell over the door jingled. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. For weeks they had whispered about me. Now they saw the anger on my face, and they knew something was coming. Roy slid into the booth across from me. Heard the news, he said. Claire's playing dirty. She's her mother's daughter. I said without thinking, then bit my tongue. Mary never would have done this. This was something darker, something born of greed and comfort. Roy leaned closer. We've got your back. Don't let them spook you. Brookfield remembers who built this town, even if your kids don't. I nodded, but the anger didn't soften. It only sharpened. The next morning, the betrayal doubled. I caught word that one of the men I trusted, Bill, a supplier who claimed he'd stand with me, had been bought. My daughter visited him the night before, waving promises of repayment, contracts, maybe even a position in the new company. By dawn, Bill had signed a statement siding with them, saying my recollections couldn't be trusted. It stung, but it didn't shock me. Money always makes its own weather. And Claire had plenty, for now. Still, the board was shifting. My children weren't waiting to defend themselves. They were attacking. Hard. They wanted to crush me before I could even walk through that door on Christmas Eve. Fine. Let them swing first. That evening, I sat in my motel room with the documents spread across the bed. Papers, affidavits, photos, all stacked like ammunition. My eyes burned from reading, my hands shook with fury. But my pulse was steady, steadier than it had been in years. I whispered to Mary's photo on the nightstand. They want to make me a ghost. I'll show them what kind of ghost I can be. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the world. Inside, the storm sharpened. They thought they could erase me. Instead, they had just made me louder. Christmas Eve morning broke cold and hard. Brookfield was wrapped in white, every rooftop lined with snow, every street muffled into silence. But inside my chest, there was no quiet, only the steady drumbeat of payback. By dawn, Paul had filed the emergency injunction against Claire's motion. Attached were affidavits from Roy, from 3 suppliers, from an accountant they'd fired for incompetence after she refused to fudge numbers. Their signatures were crisp, their statements clear. I worked with Collins. His mind is sharp. His memory is strong. He knows exactly what he's doing. That bought us time, and time was the one thing my children had always underestimated. By noon, the second strike landed. A local radio host, an old friend who still remembered when I donated lumber to rebuild the church roof, read live on air from a packet Paul leaked. Not everything, just enough. Double billing, missing payments, debts disguised as profits. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Everyone in town knew who ran the business now. Phones lit up across Brookfield. Suppliers pulled back. Creditors called. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were questions shouted across storefronts. What did David do with the money? Why hasn't Claire paid the contractors? Meanwhile, I walked Main Street with my head high for the first time in months. People nodded. Not pity now, but respect. One man clapped my shoulder. About time someone held them accountable. I just gave a thin smile and kept moving. The storm wasn't finished. By evening, the house, my house, was glowing like a jewel in the snow. Lights strung across the porch, wreaths on every window. Cars lined the street. Brookfield's finest had gathered inside. The mayor, bankers, businessmen, even the Channel 7 crew with their cameras ready to catch every laugh, every toast. My children thought they were hosting a coronation. Instead, they were about to host an execution. I didn't arrive alone. Roy walked beside me, shoulders squared. Behind us came half a dozen more, workers, suppliers, even that accountant with her stack of ledgers clutched tight in her arms. And trailing them, Paul, briefcase in one hand, the other steady as stone. We didn't need noise. Our silence was louder than the music spilling from the house. At the door, a guard in a rented tux tried to block us. David's doing. Private event, he muttered. Paul stepped forward, calm as ice. Not anymore. He flashed the injunction. The man paled and stepped aside. We entered. Warmth hit my face, the sound of laughter swelling as heads turned. My children froze mid-toast. Claire's glass trembled in her hand. David's smile faltered, but he forced it back. Dad, he said, voice booming. Didn't expect you here. You should rest. I walked forward slowly, every eye in the room tracking me. I laid my hand on the dining table, the same table where Mary once served Sunday roasts. My voice was steady, sharp. You told me I was finished. You buried me in my own basement. You laughed while you carved up my life. Tonight, we find out who's really finished. Paul placed the first document on the table, then another, and another. Contracts, bank slips, forged signatures. Claire's face drained of color. David's jaw tightened. Around us, guests leaned in, murmurs rising like waves. Cameras rolled. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. The banker whispered to his assistant. The accountant stepped forward, voice strong. These records prove systematic fraud. Payments rerouted. Workers underpaid. Loans misrepresented. David slammed his glass down. This is a setup, he barked. He's senile, doesn't know what he's talking about. But the room didn't believe him. They believed the papers. They believed the people beside me. And most of all, they believed the look in my eyes. I leaned close to my son, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. You call me a ghost. But ghosts don't disappear. They haunt. The cameras caught it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. This was no longer a party. This was the beginning of their fall. The moment the first document hit the table, the party cracked like thin ice. Smiles froze. Glasses lowered. The air changed, sharp and electric. Channel 7's reporter, a young woman with eyes like a hawk, leaned forward. Mr. Collins, are you saying your children knowingly engaged in fraud while running the company? Her microphone gleamed in the light. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until the room leaned toward me. Then I nodded, not saying, proving. Paul slid another folder across the table. Copies of loan agreements, Claire's signature in ink, my ownership conveniently omitted. Bankers in the room scanned them, their lips tightening. One of them cursed under his breath. Claire tried to laugh, brittle as glass. This is ridiculous. My father doesn't know what he's signing anymore. He's confused. She looked to the crowd for support, but the crowd had already shifted. Eyes that once admired her designer dress now studied her like a defendant in court. Roy stepped forward, his voice carrying rough honesty. She fired me after 20 years because I asked for fair pay. Said I was stealing. I wasn't. But they were. The accountant laid down her ledgers. I warned them about falsifying payroll. They told me to shred the warnings or lose my job. I lost my job, but I kept the copies. The murmurs grew into a storm. Guests backed away from David and Claire as though betrayal were contagious. David slammed the table, veins bulging in his neck. This is all lies. You people believe the word of a bitter old man over your own community leaders? He turned to the mayor. Tell them who kept this town alive. But the mayor only shifted his weight, looking at me. I remember who donated lumber after the fire of '87. Wasn't you, David. It was your father. A ripple moved through the crowd. Acknowledgement, memory, judgment. I stepped closer to my son. You thought burying me in the basement erased who I was. But this town remembers. They see you now for what you are, leeches feeding on what I built. The reporter's cameraman zoomed in. Live broadcast. Brookfield was watching. Claire's mask cracked. She hissed under her breath. You'll regret this, old man. I met her eyes without blinking. No, you will. Right on cue, Paul raised his hand. One more thing. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the injunction order, stamped and signed by the county clerk that morning. As of now, Mr. Collins is recognized as the majority owner of Collins Supply. All contracts signed under the children's authority are suspended pending investigation. Gasps filled the room. The banker who'd funded their last expansion turned to David. Do you have any idea what this means for your debt? His voice was ice. You're ruined. David's face flushed red, his words stumbling. You can't, this isn't. The reporter cut in, microphone steady. Mr. Collins, What will happen to the company now? I straightened my shoulders, feeling taller than I had in years. It will be rebuilt with honesty, not greed. And as for this house, I let my eyes sweep the chandelier, the walls, the roses outside buried under snow. It was my wife's pride. My children turned it into a cage, so it will no longer be theirs. The room erupted, guests whispering, journalists scribbling, cameras flashing. David and Claire cornered, stripped, exposed. Their empire crumbled not with fire, but with truth laid bare in front of everyone who once praised them. I walked out into the snow while the storm inside raged louder. The cold bit at my face, but I felt warm, alive, vindicated. Behind me, I heard shouting, my children trying to claw back their dignity. But dignity isn't something you can steal. It's something you either live with or lose. And they had lost. By Christmas morning, the whole town knew. Brookfield had always thrived on gossip, but this wasn't rumor anymore. It was fact, printed in headlines and shouted across radios. Collins heirs under investigation. Fraud allegations rock local business. Patriarch returns with proof. I walked into Murphy's diner for coffee, and the place went silent. Not out of pity, but respect. People nodded, some clapped me on the back, and one man whispered, "About damn time." For years, I'd been invisible in their eyes, just another old man fading. Now I was the storm everyone had overlooked. But storms don't pass quickly. They tear until nothing false is left standing. By noon, Channel 7 replayed footage of my children's faces when the documents dropped. David's sputtering rage, Claire's brittle laugh, the mayor turning his back. Over and over, the town saw them crumble. Investors pulled out within hours. The bank froze their accounts. Contractors demanded payment they didn't have. And me? I still held 51%, which meant every cent of their collapse fell back on them, not me. By late afternoon, I received the call I had been waiting for. Paul's voice was calm, almost satisfied. The state attorney is opening an inquiry. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Your children are in deep, and they know it. That night, as the town gathered for the Christmas service, whispers rippled through the pews. People stole glances at the front row where my children usually sat, dressed in finery, soaking in admiration. This year, their seats were empty. The shame kept them hidden. After the service, I lingered in the snowy churchyard, candle in hand. Roy walked up beside me. "They're finished," he said simply. "Not yet," I murmured. "There's one more thing." The last card hadn't been played. The safe in the basement, hidden behind the furnace, had more than contracts. It had photographs, signed receipts, letters from officials they bribed to secure permits. Evidence that would burn brighter than anything else. On Christmas night, when families across town gathered around trees and fires, I returned to the house. My house. It loomed dark now, stripped of guests and laughter. Only the echo of what once was. I entered with Paul, Roy, and the reporter trailing close behind. The cameras captured every step as I pulled open the furnace panel, revealing the steel box. My hands didn't shake as I lifted it out. I turned to the reporter. They thought I was just an old man in the basement. But this basement held more than me. It held the truth. When the lid opened, the flashbulbs went wild. Papers spilled out, forged permits, envelopes stuffed with bribe money receipts, letters in Claire's handwriting promising favors in exchange for silence. The kind of evidence that doesn't just ruin reputations, it ends careers, ends freedom. By midnight, the story was already broadcasting live. Patriarch unveils secret safe. Collins heirs face criminal charges. And me? I didn't stay to watch their downfall on television. I stepped out into the snow, lifted my face to the cold sky, and whispered to Mary, "It's done." But it wasn't the end. Not yet. The storm still had one last strike left. The morning after Christmas, Brookfield awoke to a new story on every front page. Collins heirs stripped of assets. Fraud charges filed. Family fortune lost overnight. My children's names weren't spoken with admiration anymore. They were whispered with disgust. David and Claire tried to fight back. Hired lawyers. Gave interviews. But the safe had spoken louder than any excuse. The documents, the letters, the bribes, they couldn't be explained away. Banks froze what little was left. Investors walked. Even their so-called friends stopped returning calls. By New Year's Eve, the house wasn't theirs. Neither was the business. And Brookfield, small, watchful Brookfield, turned its back on them. Me? I didn't take the house back. It wasn't home anymore. Too many ghosts in the walls, too much rot in the floorboards. Instead, I signed it over to a nonprofit. Within weeks, the sign out front read, Brookfield Haven, a home for the forgotten. The rooms once used for parties now filled with elders who had nowhere else to go. Men and women like me, cast aside by the very families they raised. The business? I didn't rebuild it for profit. I gave it to the workers who stayed true, the men and women cheated by my children. They ran it like it should have been run, fair wages, honest contracts. Brookfield Supply lived again, but not for greed. For survival. For dignity. As for me, I moved into the Haven. Not as a resident, but as one of them. No basement. No shadows. Just a room with sunlight and a chair by the window where I could read, write, and remember. I ate with the others, laughed with them, listened to their stories. We were a strange family, stitched together from rejection. But it was more real than the blood that betrayed me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the sound of car tires screeching past the old house. Maybe David driving too fast, running from what he'd lost. Maybe Claire, searching for someone left to believe her. I didn't look. They weren't my concern anymore. Because revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about reclaiming your own. And I had. The night the Haven opened, we lit candles in every window. Dozens of flames flickering against the snow, warm and defiant. I stood on the porch, hands steady, and whispered to the dark. They thought I was their burden. Turns out, I was their reckoning. And I smiled. The storm had passed, but its echo would last forever. They buried me in the basement, and I rose to bury them in truth.